Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Today we've got a very special episode. My guest has been on the show before, back in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, so to speak. And I wanted to have him back on the show because he's got a very interesting, what would I say here, take on living life. Dr. Mark Goulston was recently diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he is actually making it part of his remaining life's journey to talk about what it means to be facing mortality. And how does this apply to the soul of business? Well, it actually does, because it applies to the way that we as human beings tap into that soul that gives expression, or at least makes it possible to give expression to all that we experience in life. And Mark has got a pretty unique vantage point to speak about this. So without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Mark Goulston to the show. Mark, let's start by just kind of talking about and having you open the door to where you'd like to take this.
It's like mortality is my co-pilot. And it's teaching me things about life or causing them to be important, whereas I don't think I treated them that way. And so I am mentally getting better every day, because it's clearer and clearer to me what I want to and need to share with the world that I've learned from 50 years of listening to the world. And it's almost like some divine entity is telling me, share this with the world. And I actually have a series on YouTube and TikTok called I'm Dying to Tell You. And they're like 4 to 12-minute videos that I'm just sharing with the world. Now, and physically, I have this illness. It's right now it's called high-risk MDS, myelodysplastic syndrome. And I'll probably need a bone marrow transplant, but everything's lining up. I have a donor. Actually, I have 3 donors. My children all match, so that's a big deal. And it's not exactly a walk in the park, because you're isolated in the hospital for a month. And then for 5 or 6 months, you need to stay kind of undercover with a 24/7 caregiver. And I'm learning things. So here's one of the first things I want to share with you, and I think you'll echo it. I've never realized the importance of a team, because I have the best doctor I've ever had in my life. 265 5-star patient reviews. I've never seen that with a doctor. And I can tell you, Dr. Ron Paquette, hematologist, transplant specialist at Cedars-Sinai, he's amazing. And I think if I had a lousy doctor and team, I'm not sure I would feel so okay in just turning it over. I did meet with someone who was really bright but incredibly arrogant, someone I would be intimidated to call and ask a question. And I think that at least adds 50% to my calmness. So I think it's really important. There's a saying, hire slow, fire fast. So it took a while to get through to these people. Because what happens is people are trying to get through to some of the best doctors, and it's really difficult. And then what happens is when you get through to them and you meet with them face to face, you become a person. You're not just a name that's trying to get through to them. And so I think I had him at a low, because our first meeting was so terrific. I said to him, win, lose, or die, I'm good to go.
You can't beat that as a philosophy or as an outlook on life. And I use both terms advisedly here. Yeah. That's,
So,
Mark,
I'm doing fine. Yeah. And I'll tell you this.
yeah,
Here's another thing. Uh, I have never had so much interest in me in my entire life.
interest in
And I think
you.
in what I'm going through, because
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, one host on a podcast said, you know, you're in the you're you're dealing with the ultimate elephant in the room.
That is very true.
And I have a sense of humor. I said, here's the fact of the matter. Everybody who has ever lived has died, and if they can do it, so can I.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, I want to do it really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So it's been
I,
wonderful. Go
I
ahead.
love the fact that you've got a smile on your face right now. And those of you that are listening, I invite you to go over to the YouTube channel and just, watch this podcast, not just listen to the podcast. Uh, you know, yeah, I've known Mark for a while, and you have always struck me as somebody that has a true north orientation to what you do in life. I mean, um, just the work that you've done, for 50 years. You can't be dallying all and just kind of unmoored in doing the work that you've done. And now it's focusing back on you. And I love, you just began, when I asked how you were doing, you said, mortality is my co-pilot. And that notion, the Stoics talk about, the whole idea of memento mori, remember I must die, from a philosophical perspective, which is an invitation to embrace death as literally the ultimate outcome of living. So it's not so much, am I going to die? The question then becomes, how am I living? How am I living? So, the YouTube series that you're doing right now, um, these mini conversations, what are they primarily focusing on? I mean, I know they're on your journey, but specifically, what are you seeing emerge as something that is salient, something that you really are, kind of provoked to share, I guess would be the word I would use.
Well, it's I think I've always Warren Bennis was one of my mentors, and he said, "You are an articulate intuitive."
Uh-huh.
I didn't quite understand it, but I thought this is a huge compliment. and uh, and so, I have a podcast. You've been on it. My Wake Up Call. We're up to 560 episodes. It's done pretty well, and I'm the host, and I interact with my guests, so most of them remember being on the podcast because it's more like a conversation. But they're the guests, and and so now I'm being sought out as a guest talking about this. But I'll give you a couple episodes to whet you and the listeners' appetite. So the very first episode was Michelangelo dying. And what that was about is supposedly Michelangelo said, "I saw the angel in the marble and I carved till I set it free."
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened is I've seen everything that's unimportant in life and everything that's unimportant in my life, and I just lopped it off. I just said goodbye, and what it revealed that was left was radiant. And I think you can do this earlier in life.
Yeah.
But if you could sit back and you can imagine it's the end of your life just to get you motivated, and think of it, if you're looking back and you were to say, what were the unimportant things in life that I spent or wasted a lot of time on? I think you could already come up with those and then hopefully make a commitment. Yeah. And I've been able to keep the commitment because, I don't have all the time in the world. One of the other ones that might be interesting to your audience, even though it's the soul of business, it's still about business. There was an episode called Visionary Dying, because actually for for a year and a half, I did a one-man show called Steve Jobs Returns. And I played Steve Jobs coming back to Apple from 96 to 2007 when he announced the iPhone. And I channeled my inner a-hole. I had a lot of fun with that. And but I also realized the way visionaries look at the world, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, and this is probably worth writing down if you're listening or watching and applying it to yourself. It's what I call the 3 Ds of visionary leadership. First, they define reality. And they define reality not just in the realm of what's impossible, in the realm of what's unimaginable. And they're able to sort of see that. And one of the reasons that visionaries are able to see that is they're what I call first-class noticers, and they see the unknown as an adventure to be lived, whereas the majority of people see the unknown as a danger to be avoided. So they throw themselves into it.
I love that.
And when their controlling personality gets the best of that, they take psychedelics. They go on a trip. Geez, I'm getting a little bit too rigid here. My personality's overtaking me. I better take some psychedelics to see if I can, step up my going into the unknown. So they define reality. The next is they declare their intention to make it so. And one of the ways they declare their intention is they immediately stop a lot of projects that, they were sort of invested in, but they really weren't working. They didn't know why they were continuing them. I think Steve Jobs did that with a number of projects when he said, let's go build a Macintosh.
Yes.
I think he let go of a bunch of things. And then the third is they decide strategy. And the strategy is how to get that done. And visionaries, that's what they focus on. And I think one of the first things they need to do is hire someone to deal with all the people stuff. Because visionaries can't stand people, because people are messy. Right. And most visionaries are a little bit on the spectrum. Yeah. And many visionaries are a little bit on the spectrum, so they're hyper-focused. And so I applied that to dying. So I define my reality, and I've come up with what makes for a good death for me, and I think many people, and I saw it clear. One of my mentors was a psychologist named Dr. Ed Schneidman. He was a death and dying specialist, and he referred me all these suicidal patients that I saw for many years. And he also sent me out on house calls to dying patients. And he wrote an article, A Good Death. And I have all the criteria except for, live until you're 90. I'm 75. If I can squeak out, 10 years, that's a home run. 5 years is pretty good. And it could be considerably less. So, and to me, I'll just share some of the criteria for good death is I'm not into pain and suffering. So having a good doctor, and apparently I'm stoic. I had a bone marrow biopsy 2 days ago, still have the bandages on my back. And they did it, my hematologist did it, in the clinic, put in a little local anesthesia, and I didn't flinch. And my wife was there, and he looked at my wife and saying, "What's with your husband?" And I'm saying, "I'm sorry if I'm disappointing you, but I don't really feel it." And so I really have a lot of trust and confidence in him. So I think pain and suffering is going to be minimized. Second thing, I have a pathology. I can't stand being a burden to anyone. I mean, and I think part of it came from the fact that my dad could be a little on the negative side and a little bit intrusive, and I miss him. He did the best he could. But I think I internalized when I grow up, I'm not going to be a burden to anyone. And it's part of my DNA. It's one of the reasons I have trouble asking for anything. I have trouble receiving, caring, and help. So I want to give you a lesson about that.
That's going to be an interesting part of the journey.
Oh, absolutely. And so, My wife told me that she'll be okay financially, and I had a good cry for half a day on that one. And my children are pretty much launched. And what's left is I'm the visionary, apparently, of about 7 projects. And I think they're pretty good visions. Some of them are game changers. And I want to make sure they go on. And then I mentor about 40 people. And 10 of them are certifiable geniuses. I mean, that will change the world. And I make 2 introductions a day. And I'd like to see these geniuses, be able to, like one of them, really has a focus on helping Ukraine win the war and then rebuild itself. So I introduced them to RAND Corporation, big think tank. And that led to, they're now meeting with some of the senior people of Ukraine, because this person's a genius. they really could help in that regard. And then there's other things that make to me for a good death. But here's a lesson I want to share, and I might get emotional with you, but you'll allow that.
Yeah.
I really never let anyone care about me, because I'm the caretaker. I'm the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 months ago, I was speaking to someone. Usually someone would say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I would usually say, "I'm fine. What are you up to?" And I didn't realize that I live to give, and now I give to live. When I give to live, I'm coming from abundance.
Yeah.
And every time I'm giving to someone, I feel alive. I'm not very good at taking or asking for something. So about 3 months ago, someone, I guess, apparently cares about me, said, "How you doing?" And normally I'd say, "I'm fine. What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I got a few issues." And he said, "Well, what's going on?" And then something overtook me. And I said, "I might be dying. I can feel it now." And I got emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got emotional, I got embarrassed. And I started apologizing. I said, "I'm so sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry." And since then, and I have a feeling you're going to join a club that's formed around me. Since then, everyone has said, "Don't apologize."
Yes.
And I said, "But I'm emotional. I'm embarrassed." And here's some of the feedback I've gotten that has been astonishing. The one person said, "You're not a burden, Mark. You're a gift."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "How am I a gift?" And he said to me, "This is the most emotionally intimate conversation I've ever had." And that's not that unusual. If you talk to a lot of people, how emotionally intimate were you ever able to be with your dad? A lot of people say, "Not really. I mean, I knew what he liked. He knew what I liked, but he didn't really know me. I didn't really know him."
Yeah.
And then another person said, "I envy you, Mark." And I'm thinking, this is crazy feedback. And I said, "Why? Well, what do you mean?" He said, No, you can have your illness. I'm happy for you to have your illness." He said, "But right now, your being emotional means you feel safe with me.
Yes. Yep.
And you see it as emotional, but you're feeling safe with me and being that way. You are free. I've never trusted anyone. I've never felt that safe with anyone.
Yeah.
To feel free. That's what I envy."
Go
ahead.
I love this. When my dad was dying, yeah, he was gone all the time. And so we never had a real intimate relationship at all when I was growing up. And we've talked a little bit about this before, but I remember, the last couple of years with him, when I would go see him at his place in Oregon, I would begin the visit with, "Tell me something I don't know about you."
Hmm.
So instead of saying goodbye, because I knew he was dying, it was an exercise in saying hello. Yeah,
Hmm.
just say hello. Tell me something about you I don't know. And he would start regaling me with stories, when he was 18. And I mean, so I got glimpses of him that I never had when he was in the role of father. I now was connecting with him um, in a way that, Will Schutz, Dr. Will Schutz, was a mentor of mine at one point in time. Well, actually, for a number of years. He said, we connect through vulnerability. We connect through vulnerability. And I had never put the dots together in the way that you just connected them here, around safety, and safety equating to freedom. When I'm vulnerable with somebody, by definition, I do feel safe around them, or I wouldn't be opening up. There's that notion of I trust you to let me be seen for what's going on with me at this point in time.
So, uh,
And there is such a
can I?
gift in that.
So I want to tap into a little bit of your vulnerability. You're willing. You're willing to trust me on this.
Oh, absolutely. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive.
So I love that question. Tell me something I don't know about you. And if you're listening or watching this, save that question. After that person answers, the second question is, what was that like for you? So if I were to say to you that he started to answer and tell you things that you'd never heard before, and you listened to the telling of it, what was that like for you?
There was the way that I answer that, I'm just kind of reflecting on this. There was the experience of warmth. I noticed and I do notice in my memory about just leaning in with a smile. There was this sense of actually reverence and awe. Because there was a 78-year-old man sitting in front of me at that point. And this goes back a number of years, but I hadn't seen him in the way that he was describing himself, and to be able to see him in that story, being that young 18-year-old, driving his Model A over the Coast Range in rural Oregon on an old logging road. I mean, I could just imagine that. And I knew my dad well enough, to know that he actually loved to drive. I mean, he was a truck driver. That was one of his vocations. He loved to drive, and I could just, and I still do. I feel it in my heart. There was this reverence. There was just this reverence for a life that is, being reminisced about, but is informing who I see in front of me right now. There's this being, not my father. There's just this mensch. I mean, it really was in the truest meaning of that word, that was sitting in front of
Okay,
me. And
okay, so
I would
I want to
almost invariably, I would get up with a tear in my eye and I'd hug it.
so I'm going to give you,
So,
because sometimes I give people words for their feelings that they're not in touch with. And I'd like you to repeat this back to me. I'm taking a chance because it may land flat. But if you could say to me and lean into it, Mark, I felt closer to him.
mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was really beautiful for me was when he did die.
Mm,
I didn't feel as if there was anything left unsaid, and there were no questions that I was left with. And that intimacy is kind of the catalyst for that ultimate experience, I guess. I mean, I don't want to intellectualize it, but that really was the experience. There was a completion. I guess that would be actually the nest or the net of the process. I felt complete with
mm.
that relationship, and not complete in the sense that I'm done with it, but just complete in the sense there's nothing unfinished here. It is it's a holy whole.
I'll tell you a quirky story. I don't know if quirky is not the right word. But my dad was hardworking. He wasn't particularly introspective, and something I always wanted from him was some wisdom about life. But towards the end, he developed Alzheimer's, and I kind of went into a funk because I remember there was one phone call and he used to be a real tough, intimidating guy, and he said on the phone, "Oh, I'll put your mom on." And afterwards, I said to my wife, I said, I'm not going to get from him what I still need. And then it went on, and it's amazing how you lose dignity when you lose your mind. And so there we are. We're at the funeral, and my immediate family had a viewing of the coffin, and then it came out in front. And really, as God is my witness, what I'm about to tell you is true. There he was lying. I guess he had had a stroke, and the morticianers had tried to straighten things out. One of the sides of his cheek was like that, and I leaned over and I kissed him, and I heard his voice as loud as I'm hearing yours, and he said, "Don't treat a big thing like a little thing. And don't treat a little thing like a big thing. Don't do what I did." So I got my piece of wisdom.
Yeah.
Amazing what we'll do it's amazing what we'll do in order to feel complete. I did want to share my vulnerability story and say, you might want to join this club. It's what I call my 700 club, because these people I've been speaking to, and when I just open up to them, and it's really interesting because some of them are on the spectrum, and they'll look at me, and I'm opening up, and one in particular, big CEO, he was in good to great, and he's like twisting his face like this, and he doesn't. It's as if he was thinking what Mark is doing right now is really important. And I'm not sure I get it, but what he's doing is really important. I was just being emotionally real with him. And he said, it's not a burden, Mark, it's an honor. And then he started off this club, and he said, Mark, 24/7. you can call me 24/7.
Yep.
And most of them have said, count me into the 24/7 club. And some of these
Sign me
people
up.
that you and I, yeah, hey, one of our mutual friends, and we know him well, and I guess I got emotional with Marshall Goldsmith.
Oh, Marshall,
I mean,
yeah.
it's tough to pin Marshall down. And I can tell you, with these people, if I had some cockamamie business idea that I chased after them about, they would ghost me. Well, thank you, Mark. I don't think I really have time, and I'm doing a lot of things, and all these people are busy. But nearly all of them have said, "Sign me up, 24/7."
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to call any of them. And here's the other thing that I realized: it's a combination of vulnerability without helplessness. Because I think sometimes helplessness is, oh, I don't know what to do, and then you try to be sympathetic, and but apparently I don't come off helpless with the vulnerability. It just bubbles up,
No.
and there you go, and and people have said it's mesmerizing.
Oh,
I'm like a deer in the headlights of a human being.
who's this in front of me? Well, I think there is a really interesting paradox between the kind of vulnerability that we're speaking about, because it does not foster helplessness. I think it takes great strength to be that vulnerable, truly. And it doesn't mean I necessarily know what I'm doing next, but I'm willing to stand in that uncertainty. And that's the power. And it's also the invitation to join with. This goes all the way back to your one of your very opening comments about, the value of a team, having somebody there that, is an advocate for who you are, as well as what you're in the midst of. So that I remember when my late wife was dying, her oncologist. I love this guy, and he's retired now. His name is Henry Kaplan, Dr. Henry Kaplan, hematologist, hematological oncologist. I mean, big titles. But he was one of the most empathetic, one of the most caring, one of the most genuine, and one of the most authentic human beings I have ever met in my life. He was always available. And the day that she died, about an hour and a half after she had passed, I was coming out of her hospital room, and his office was, in the whole Swedish system here in the Seattle area. I knew where his office was. I'd been there 1,000 times. So I went down the elevator and went into his office just to say thank you, basically just to say thank you. And I walked in the office, and he saw me, and he looked at his charge nurse, or his scheduling nurse, and said, cancel the next hour and a half. I'll reschedule. I'll stay late to pick it up, whatever, but cancel the next hour and a half. I didn't ask him for anything. I just showed up, and he said, come in. And we sat down for the next hour. He was just there. And I was gobsmacked by his presence, by his vulnerability, by his willingness to just be with, the experience that is accompanying, that whole process of passing. And I was genuinely moved, still am moved. I mean, I feel this every time I talk about him. And that takes, in my estimation, it takes great courage, great strength, and a great capacity just to recognize that this is a holy moment. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean it in the sense of wholeness. There's things that are closing, connecting, coming to fruition. So it's like my conversations with my dad. There's reverence in connecting, but there's also celebration in closing. And I walked out of his office at the end of that hour and a half, and and I entered the window of grief at that point in time. But I entered it um, from the perspective of having been seen and heard, which
You
was
know,
such a gift.
something you may not understood, uh, and some of these other people that I've spoken, uh, one person said, "So you gave him a gift of receiving his caring and his being able to see that it made some kind of a difference in terms of comforting you in such a difficult time." And I thought,
Yeah,
what an ironic statement that you gave him the gift of receiving his caring and having it help. You know, people
yeah,
used to say to me, you know, you were a
yeah,
suicide prevention specialist. It must have been really depressing doing that for 35 years. And I said, it was actually a gift, because when I could have a conversation with someone and they and what I would do, and it was simple. You know, I try to simplify things, but you know, healthcare systems complicate them. So the barriers to entry have just
yes,
always stopped me. But my approach to suicidal patients, and if you're worried about someone who's depressed in your life, my whole approach was, how can we have a conversation that lessens their hurt sufficiently so they let go of death as the only way to take the pain away? How can we be interacting? And I coined a term, surgical empathy,
mm-hmm.
going in and severing their psychological adhesion to death as being compassionate to taking their pain away. And what I realized is, when I could join people in the dark night of the soul, as opposed to throwing treatments at them, so I would join them there and I'd keep them company there, they would start to cry because all they'd ever felt was alone there.
Yeah,
And the more they could see that I wasn't rushing them into the treatment, which modern day doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists don't have the time to do. They don't have that hour and a half because someone's on their back. That what would happen is that connection spontaneously transitioned into hope.
mm-hmm.
So that was my approach, you know, connect with people as deeply as you can wherever they are, so that they feel you're right next to them as opposed to rushing them into something. And
Yeah,
when you get it right with surgical empathy, and they would look at me like, why are you doing this? And I look at them and I said, you really shouldn't be alone right now.
mm-hmm. Yeah. You shouldn't.
But can you see how that works? How you know, when they feel less alone enough to start crying with relief,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that hope starts to reveal itself.
Yeah.
I mean, with
Well,
some of them, they would say, some of them they would say. Here's an insight I want to give you from a good friend of mine. I guess I'm one of her mentors, Melissa Bernstein. She and her husband have one of the most successful toy companies in the country, Melissa and Doug. If you have grandchildren,
mm-hmm.
these are these great little toys. And it'll come back to me. Well, anyway, I just think that one of the greatest gifts you can give someone is to be there with them, and then spontaneously they will ask for treatment. Well,
Yep.
Dr. Goulston, don't you think we should be talking about treatment? Well, your parents are certainly curious what the heck we're doing here. Are you ready? I don't want to rush you in this healing process, you know.
But yeah, we need to move along here. Yeah. You know, you used, you know, the two, you know, you used a single word there, but it triggered another word in my mind: being with them. And so often I
Mm,
find that, you know, we think that we need to be there for them. And I don't believe that being there for somebody is as good or as useful or as generative or as healing as being with them. Is
What's
that a fair
interesting, I love,
assessment in your experience?
no, uh, I would say the way to be there for them is to be with them.
Yeah.
Because something else I brought out in these interviews is dying is not happening to me, it's happening for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's enabled me to realize stuff that I never could have realized, you know, before this happened. And so every day, I'm realizing things like some of the things I've shared with you: Michelangelo dying, visionary dying, the power of vulnerability. And so I think the prospect of dying is here for me because it's just teaching me wondrous things. And I feel one of the reasons I feel a sense of urgency to get it out is I could be wrong, but if I do the transplant, which it looks like I'm going to do, one of the side effects can be long-term cognitive problems. And in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, I'm thinking, you know, I'm not going to lose the ability to dress myself and, and just be sort of a dumbass dad, dumbass grandpa, doting on everything. I'll be able to do that. But my creative ability, my ability to
Uh-huh.
be reasonably articulate, that could go.
Yeah.
And and if it does, I hope I'm a good sport. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
rushing to share, whatever I'm learning, I got to get it out.
Got to get it. Mark, it's interesting that you mentioned the dark night of the soul. And I've always wrestled with that notion. For me, particularly when I look at it through the lens of the ending of my life, this transitional cycle, it comes up more as a dark night of the ego that allows for the emergence of the soul,
Mm.
the light of the soul to actually begin to emerge
Mm.
fully. Because when you started off, at the beginning of our conversation here,
Ooh, I love that.
I'm
Ooh.
lopping things off, things that I don't need, and a lot of that is egoically structured. So the dark and the ego does not like to die. It just kind of, no, no, no. It'll get kicking and screaming into the night. So for me, it's the dark night of the ego that, is causing, it causes the suffering that people experience when they get close to the end of their lifespan. That attachment to that sense of who I was or who I was supposed to be.
So I want to respond to that. And Warren Bennis, when he gave me a supreme compliment, and I would, and I would be very neurotic about it. He said, "Mark, I don't give them out just willy nilly. There's two words: thank you. And if you make a big deal out of it, I'm not going to give you any more compliments. So here's my compliment for you. What you just said about the dark night of the ego to allow the light of the soul to shine through, that is so brilliant.
Thank you.
You learn well.
Well, I have you in my life.
Absolutely, my friend.
Folks, we've been talking to Mark Goulston, Dr. Mark Goulston. Mark, where can people find out about the video series that you're doing on YouTube? What's the best way for them to get connected to that?
So I think if you look up "I'm Dying to Tell You" Goulston YouTube, you'll find it. I think it's "I'm Dying to Tell You" Dr. Mark. And lagging behind it, but people are saying you got to get it on TikTok. I have also a TikTok, "I'm Dying to Tell You." That's lagging behind, but people who seem to want to support my legacy say, TikTok is kind of the future, so it's also there.
Okay.
And here's
I'll
something
make
I'll
sure
say
that.
to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
About you. Because one of the things that also helps me stay alive is that I know you're doing very well and the soul of business is terrific. But every now and then I run into people such as you, and there's a much bigger game you could be playing. And maybe the soul of business is the bigger game. But, to whatever extent that, you want to ever brainstorm, what did you mean by that, Mark? It'd be my pleasure to have conversation with you.
Okay, I am going to take you up on that. I would love to
I
find
hope
out
you will.
more about what you mean by that. I truly would. Yeah. So,
I already have some ideas, so that'll be offline.
okay, I was going to say, I'm going to circle back with you after we finish up here and we'll get something on the calendar in the next day or so. Uh,
Sounds good.
right while the iron is hot. Okay. And I'll put the contact information or the YouTube and the TikTok information obviously in the show notes and whatnot. So folks, you've been listening again to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. This has been just an incredibly, I want to use the word moving. It's not moving. Enlightening, enlivening. I think enlivening. This has been an enlivening interview. I'm personally very touched, and listen to this. Listen to this episode a couple of times. I think there are some very interesting gems here that Mark is sharing with us, and it's good to revisit this. Okay, Mark, thanks a bunch, and I will circle back.